Alright, listen, I know some of you guys just don't like these rule stories, and I've been listening to a couple and I decided to write my own, so I hope the ones that do not like the rule stories at least give this one a try. It was a lot of fun for me to write, and I hope you guys leave some suggestions in the comments section down below. And if you want me to write more of these types of stories, please leave a thumbs up and a comment. I greatly appreciate all of you, and have a very Merry Christmas. I never wanted to work nights at Green's Corner Market, but my student loans weren't going to pay themselves, and my dream of becoming a famous YouTuber hadn't exactly panned out. It turns out the internet doesn't need another gaming channel run by a sleep-deprived 20-something with questionable life choices. But the $3 premium for a third shift seemed like a good deal at the time. That was before I knew about the rules, the thing in the dairy aisle, and the stranger in red who visits at 3:33 a.m. But let me back up. The store itself looks like any other convenience store that time forgot. Fluorescent lights that flicker like they're having seizures, linoleum floors with mysterious stains that have probably been there since the Reagan administration, and that weird smell that's somewhere between stale coffee and broken dreams. But Green's Corner Market has quirks. You see, during my training, Sarah, our evening manager and possibly cult leader, the jury's still out on that one, handed me a yellowed piece of paper tucked into the back of the employee handbook. 5 rules, hidden in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. Though, knowing this place, it was probably just red ink, and God, I hoped it was red ink. "These are the night shift rules," she said, her face more serious than an IRS audit. "Follow them exactly." I laughed because, well, of course I did. I'm the guy who once tried to microwave a fork to prove my roommate wrong. Critical thinking isn't exactly my strong suit. But Sarah didn't laugh. Instead, she demonstrated rule number 1. Make sure the back loading dock door is closed and deadbolted, then draw a triangle on it with your finger. Start from the top point, she insisted, moving her finger with surgical precision. Down to the bottom right, across to the left, then back up. Never counterclockwise. Ever. Don't ever do that. "Well, what happens if you go counterclockwise?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. I mean, does the store turn into a portal to hell? Sarah just stared at me. Worse. Now that should have been my first clue that this wasn't your typical retail job. The second clue should have been rule number 2. Never stock the canned goods between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. The note underneath simply said, "They like to roll." It wasn't ominous at all. But rule number 3 was equally cryptic. If you hear someone calling your name from the dairy aisle, don't answer. Even if it sounds like Sarah. Even if it sounds like your mother. Even if it sounds like that one celebrity you've had a crush on since middle school. Looking at you, Emma Watson. Rule number 4 stated that the old price scanner by Register 3 must remain unplugged. If you find it plugged in, don't unplug it yourself. Call Sarah, no matter the time. I once joked that maybe this scanner was possessed by the ghost of a retail past. Sarah didn't laugh at that either. And rule number 5, the one that still makes my skin crawl. If a child comes to the window asking to use the phone, ignore them. They aren't children. But here's the thing about the rules. They usually exist because someone, somewhere, screwed up badly enough to make them necessary. I found out why one night when I was feeling particularly rebellious and sleep-deprived. It was around 2 a.m. and I was bored out of my mind. The only customer had been a guy buying energy drinks and beef jerky at midnight. It's the classic meal of champions. I decided to explore the store's back room, mainly because the Wi-Fi was better back there for watching cat videos. And that's when I found it. An old journal wedged behind some boxes of expired protein bars. The cover was leather. The real kind, not that fake stuff they use nowadays. And the title read, Store Records, 1842. Now, being the responsible employee that I am, I immediately went out front, grabbed a bag of Doritos, and started reading. It turns out, Green's Corner Market wasn't always a convenience store. It was built as something else entirely, a containment site. The original owner, Theodore Green, had accidentally unleashed something while digging the foundation. Something that, according to the journal, wore faces like masks and spoke with voices stolen from the living. The 5 rules weren't security protocols. They were seals, keeping whatever was down there from getting up here, and each rule maintained a different barrier, and breaking them weakened the containment. But there was another rule, hidden between the pages and written in shaky handwriting. If the seals weaken, he comes. The burned man in red arrives at 3:33 in the morning, seeking payment in flesh and memory. Do not look at his face. What was burned can never heal. Now, of course, being the genius that I am, I decided to test this theory. Not intentionally, I'm stupid, not suicidal. I just forgot to draw the triangle one night. Well, technically I drew it counterclockwise because I was too busy trying to perfect my TikTok dance moves. Please don't judge me, the night shift gets really boring. The first sign that I'd screwed up came at 3:17 in the morning. The temperature dropped so fast that my breath came out in clouds, and the fluorescent lights took on a sickly greenish tinge. The security cameras started showing static, except for Register 3's camera, which kept focusing on that unplugged price scanner. And at 3:33 exactly, the front door chimes rang. He stood there in a red coat that might have been fancy once, before whatever fire had melted half of his face. His remaining eye reflected the fluorescent lights like a cat's, and a smile. That smile. Well, imagine if someone taught a shark about human expressions but forgot to mention that showing all your teeth is creepy as hell. "Michael?" he said, using my full name even though my name tag clearly says Mike. His voice sounded like radio static and grinding metal. "You broke a seal." I did what any rational person would do. I tried to bullshit my way out of it. "Actually, sir, we're closed, but there's a 24-hour Walmart about." He was suddenly at the counter, moving without actually moving, like a glitch in reality. "The rules exist for a reason, Michael. Would you like to know why?" Before I could decline this generous offer, he grabbed my wrist. His touch felt like ice and electricity, and suddenly, I was seeing. Capital S intended. I saw what lived beneath the store. I saw why the cans roll at 3 a.m. They're dancing to music that we can't hear, played on instruments made of bone and sinew. I saw what waits in the dairy aisle, wearing faces it collected over centuries, and I saw why the price scanner needs to stay unplugged. Because it doesn't scan prices, it scans souls, and some things are better left unregistered. "The seals are weakening," the burned man said, his melted face inches from mine. "The rules must be followed, or next time I won't come alone." I blinked, and he was gone. The temperature returned to normal, and the security cameras cleared. The only evidence he'd been there was a scorch mark on the counter where his hand had been, and a new entry in the register's transaction log. Soul credit, $3.33. Now, I quit smoking after that night, not because of any health concerns, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that the burned man's face had looked exactly like what happens when you fall asleep with a lit cigarette. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Now, that was 3 months ago. I still worked the night shift, but now I follow the rules religiously. I draw that triangle like I'm defusing a bomb. I avoid the dairy aisle between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. like it's my ex at a family reunion. And I triple check that damn price scanner every hour. Sometimes on really quiet nights, I could hear something scratching at the foundation of the store. Something old and patient, wearing faces that borrowed and speaking with stolen voices. But as long as we follow the rules, it stays down there. As long as we maintain the seals, the burned man doesn't come back. But here's the thing about the rules. They're meant to be broken. And lately I've noticed the new hire eyeing the price scanner with a little too much curiosity. Maybe I should tell him about the burn man, or maybe I'll just wait and watch. After all, some lessons you have to learn the hard way. Just like I did last week, when I discovered there's actually a 6th rule. But that's another story, and honestly, I'm still trying to grow back my eyebrows from that incident. Let's just say it involves the coffee machine, a mysterious customer who only pays in pennies from the 1800s, and a very angry raccoon that might not actually be a raccoon. Welcome to Green's Corner Market, where the coffee is stale, the rules are weird, and something ancient is always watching from behind the expired dairy products. Would you like to apply to our rewards program? So here's what I found in the back of the employee handbook, added in different handwriting. Rule 6, Emergency Protocol. If you find yourself working past 4:44 a.m. and the lights start bleeding, do not, under any circumstances, accept the burn man's offer to clock out early. Trust me on this one. Some overtime isn't worth the cost. And P.S., if you're reading this, new guy, yes you, the thing in the dairy aisle really does know your browser history. Maybe cool it with the weird pouring during your break, okay? Some things you can't unsee. And trust me, neither can it. Now remember how I mentioned finding out about rule number 6? Well, that particular adventure started with me to watch porn in the stockroom. It's not my proudest moment, but hey, night shift does things to your brain. When you're alone at 3 a.m. with nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional sound of something scratching at the walls, you find ways to pass the time. I dropped my phone while trying to clear my browser history because, knowing my luck, the dairy aisle thing really could see my search results. The flashlight beam caught something behind the shelf of expired Hostess cakes. A door frame. It was barely visible, like someone had tried really hard to hide it, but years of minimum wage stalkers had slowly revealed its existence through the ancient retail tradition of bump and run. Now, any sane person would have ignored it, but sanity isn't exactly a job requirement at Green's Corner Market. Besides, after dealing with the burned man and whatever lives in the dairy aisle, how bad could a basement be? Famous last words, right? The door was old, like probably witnessed the Civil War old. Solid oak with iron hinges that looked like they'd been forged by someone who thought rust was a fashion statement. It opened with a groan that sounded suspiciously like, "Don't." The smell hit me first, musty pages and something metallic. You know that penny-like taste you get in your mouth right before something really bad happens? It was like that, but as a smell. My flashlight beam caught cobwebs that seemed to move away from the light, and dust that swirled in patterns that looked almost like letters. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step threatening to send me plummeting into whatever waited below. The basement itself was about half the size of the store, but it felt bigger somehow, like the corners stretched a little too far into the darkness. The walls were lined with shelves, but instead of the usual convenience store fare of chips and questionable hot dogs, these held books. Ancient volumes bound in materials that definitely weren't approved by PETA. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it lay a massive book bound in what I desperately hoped was very old leather. The Market's Ledger, 1842 to present, read the gold lettering on the cover, and below it in smaller text, rules and regulations for the containment of that which dwells between. Well, shit, I muttered. This is way more interesting than Pornhub. The first entry was dated April 15th, 1942. We sealed it in today. The thing that came through when we broke ground for the foundation. The thing that took little Mary and left something wearing her skin. The symbols hold it back, but it tests the barriers. We have established 5 rules, 5 anchors to maintain the seals. God help those who break them. I kept reading, each page revealing more about the story's true purpose. Theodore Green hadn't built a store. He had built a prison. And the thing they found while digging the foundation wasn't just one entity, but many. Or maybe it was one thing that could be many things. The writing got pretty philosophical about it. But the rules, it turned out, weren't just company policy. They were binding rituals. The triangle on the loading dock door, a symbol of containment pointing downward to force something to stay below. The canned goods rolling at 3 a.m., they moved in response to whatever was trying to rise through the floor, creating a pattern that pushes it back down. The dairy aisle voice, well, that's how it hunts. It steals voices from memories, uses them to lure people close enough to, well, the details were graphic enough to put me off milk for a while. But it was the entry about the burn man that really caught my attention. June 6, 1866. The broker came again today. He wears red now in his face. Well, God help me, his face. Says he's appointed himself guardian of the seals. Says his punishment fits his crime. He tried to break them once, long ago, and now he enforces them for eternity. When the seals weaken, he comes, always at 3:33, always seeking payment. The next page had a photograph, old and sepia-toned. It showed the store's exterior in what must have been the early 1900s. In the window, barely visible, stood a figure in a red coat. His face was turned away from the camera, but in the glass reflection, you could see what looked like melted wax where his features should have been. I was so engrossed in reading that I almost missed the temperature drop. Almost didn't notice the dust swirling faster, forming words on the air. Welcome to the archive, Michael. The voice that spoke next seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like it was being whispered directly into my brain. Most night shift workers just stick to their phones, you know. But you, well, you had to go looking. I turned slowly, already knowing who or what I'd see. The burned man stood by the stairs, his red coat pristine despite the dust. His melted face seemed to shift in the flashlight beam, like hot wax still trying to find its final form. The curious ones are always my favorite, he said, his ruined mouth forming something like a smile. They make the best replacements. Placements? Yeah, my voice definitely didn't crack. Do you think that I was the first? He gestured to his face. This job has openings from time to time. When the current guardian fails, when they break the rules themselves. Hey, thanks for the job offer, but I'm good with my current position. Great benefits, free expired snacks. He laughed, and it sounded like crackling flames. You misunderstood. This isn't an offer. The stairs behind him had vanished, replaced by a solid wall. The books on the shelves began to whisper, their pages rustling with voices I recognized from the dairy aisle. You found the archive, he said, stepping closer. And now you have a choice. Learn the true rules and become their guardian. His remaining eye flared like an ember. Or join the things that we keep below. And that's when I noticed something about the books on the shelves. They weren't all ancient. Some looked newer. One had my name on the spine. What's it going to be, Michael? Guardian or resident? I opened my mouth to answer, but the lights chose that moment to flicker. When they steadied, the burned man was gone. The stairs were back. On the pedestal next to the ledger sat a red coat. I ran up those stairs faster than I'd ever moved in my life. The door slammed behind me with a finality that felt like judgment. When my heart finally stopped trying to escape through my throat, I noticed a new rule had been added to my copy of the night shift rules. Rule 7, classified. The archive in the basement holds the true history of Green's Corner Market. Once read, you become part of that history. Choose your role wisely. Some choices burn eternal. Now, I still work the night shift, I still follow the rules, but now I understand why. And sometimes when I'm doing my rounds, I catch a glimpse of myself in the store windows. Just for a second in the reflection, I swear I see a red coat. But that's a story for another night. Right now I need to draw a triangle on the loading dock door. Clockwise, of course, it's always clockwise. After all, I've seen what happens to those who break the rules. And I've read what happens to those who enforce them. Remember how I mentioned finding that basement door behind the expired Hostess cakes? Well, curiosity might have killed the cat, but satisfaction apparently involves discovering eldritch horrors beneath a convenience store. Go figure. I decided to take another look. Look, I know, I'm a bit dense, but curiosity, I should have learned my lesson the first time when I ran into the red coat wearing stranger that looks like a melted version of a Manhattan doorman. Anyway, I went down to the basement again and took another look at all those books. And that's when I noticed something odd about the shelves around me. Between the ancient tomes were newer books. Much newer. In fact, one caught my eye. Employee Records, 1990 to 2000. I pulled it down, ignoring the way the spine felt warm to the touch. And inside were names. Hundreds of names. Night shift workers, all of them. Each entry started normally enough. Hire date, position, the usual HR stuff. But then they got weird. Like, really weird. James Peterson, hired June 15th, 1991. Broke rule number 3, answered the dairy aisle. What returned wearing his face lasted 2 weeks before we noticed. Shannon McWilliams, hired August 3rd, 1993. Drew the triangle counterclockwise. Found 3 days later in the loading dock. Body intact, soul absent. Travis Roper, hired December 25th, 1995. Stocked canned goods at 3:27 a.m. Security footage shows cans rolling in perfect circles for 6 hours. David rolled with them. Haven't seen him since. The temperatures suddenly dropped, my breath came out in clouds, and the flashlight beam dimmed. Something moved in the darkness between the shelves, something that shouldn't have been able to fit in those narrow spaces. I heard a sound from deeper in the basement, like cans rolling on concrete, like voices calling from the dairy aisle, like children tapping on the windows at 3 a.m. The book in my hand grew warmer. New words appeared on the page I was reading. Michael, hired September 2024, found the archive, knows too much. Will he join the collection? And that's when I noticed something about the other books on the shelves. They weren't just records. They were containers. Each one hummed with a different voice, different memories, different souls. I ran up those stairs faster than I ever moved in my life, taking them 3 at a time, not stopping even when I heard something slithering up behind me. The door slammed shut on its own, and I swear I heard laughter from the other side. When my heart finally stopped trying to escape through my throat, I noticed a new rule had been added to my copy of the night shift rules. Rule 6, Classified 2A. The basement archives hold more than records. Each book is a cell, each shelf a prison block. Do not read them, do not open them, and whatever you do, don't let them read you. Now I still work the night shift, I still follow the rules, but now I understand why. And sometimes late at night when the store is empty and the fluorescent lights buzz like dying insects, I hear something moving beneath the floor. Something that knows my name. Something that's writing my story 1 page at a time. So I've started bringing headphones to work. Really good ones with noise cancellation. Because sometimes between the shelves of expired snack cakes and questionable energy drinks, I swear I could hear the basement books whispering. They're writing new chapters, and they've saved the space on their shelf, just for me. Now, after discovering the basement archive, I thought I'd seen the worst of what Green's Corner Market had to offer. Turns out, that was just the appetizer. The main course? Well, that came a week later, when I finally learned why Rule 3 exists. It started like most terrible decisions in my life, with me being too clever for my own good. I'd been obsessing over the employee records I'd found in the basement, particularly the entries about the dairy aisle. What exactly was doing the calling? Why did it steal voices? And what happened to the people who answered? Missing employees found. Faces wrong, voices stolen, memories scrambled. The records were full of cryptic entries just like these, but none explained the why of it all. So I decided to investigate, not by breaking Rule 3. I'm stupid, but I'm not that stupid, I think. Instead, I set up my phone to record audio while I did my rounds. The dairy aisle always gave me the creeps. But signs demand sacrifice, right? Even if that science involves potentially cosmic horrors lurking between the yogurt and the Kraft cheese singles. The first few recordings caught nothing unusual, just the hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional drip from that one leaky ceiling tile that maintenance swears they fixed 6 times. But on the 4th night, I caught something. It was really subtle at first. A whisper beneath the mechanical drone. Words just on the edge of comprehension. I ran the audio through some filters, and thank you sketchy audio software from Reddit. And what I heard, well, let's just say I finally understood why the basement books felt warm to the touch. It wasn't one voice calling. It was hundreds, thousands. Every voice that had ever been stolen, all speaking at once. But they just weren't calling out names. They were having conversations with each other, with themselves, with people who don't exist anymore. Remember the taste of summer. I miss the color blue. Does anyone remember my name? So hungry, I'm always so hungry. Help me find my face. The voices overlapped, creating patterns that made my head hurt, but beneath them all was something else. Something older. Something that spoke in a language that felt like ice picks in my brain. Now I cross-referenced the audio with the basement records. Every single person who answered the dairy aisle's call, well, their voices were in there, part of that horrible chorus. But they weren't victims. They were bait. You see, the thing in the dairy aisle, it's just not stealing voices. It's collecting them, building something, a library of sounds that it uses to lure in new victims. Each voice it takes makes its call more convincing, more compelling. But here's the real kicker. Remember how I said the basement was bigger than it should be? Well, I did some measuring. The dairy aisle? It's exactly the same length as the basement's main corridor. And every night at 3 a.m., if you look really carefully at the reflection in the freezer doors, you can see books on the shelves instead of milk. The dairy aisle isn't just connected to the basement. It is the basement. Or maybe the basement is the dairy aisle. The division between above and below gets pretty fuzzy at 3 in the morning. I found an old blueprint of the store in one of the basement books. The original layout didn't have a dairy aisle. It was added in 1843, right after they contained whatever they found in the foundation. The notes in the margins are interesting, to say the least. The voices must be stored properly, temperature controlled, preserved. They are the key to this containment. It feeds on memories, but can only digest them if they're properly frozen. The dairy aisle will serve as both prison and larder. And that's when I noticed something else. Something that made my blood run colder than the ice cream freezer. The employee records. They all showed the same pattern. Every single person who answered the dairy aisle's call disappeared on a night when the power flickered, when the refrigeration unit struggled to maintain temperature. Just like they're doing tonight. The lights above me are flickering as I write this. The refrigeration units are making that weird grinding sounds they make when they're working too hard, and I swear the voices are getting louder. Michael. You see, that's my mom's voice, and it's coming from somewhere between the cottage cheese and the heavy cream. But my mom's been dead for 5 years. Michael, I miss you. You see, the voice is perfect. Every inflection, every subtle tone that made my mom's voice uniquely hers. And for a second, I almost forgot Rule 3. Almost turned around. Almost answered. Then I remembered the basement books. Remember the warmth of trapped souls beneath my fingers. Remember the entries about faces worn like masks. And the voice calls again. But this time I hear what's beneath it. The hunger, the cold, the void where memories go to freeze. Now I've gotten better noise cancellation headphones and I've been bringing them to work. The old kind, which was really expensive, well, I lost. But I need them because now some nights the voices get really creative. They mix and match and they create new combinations. Last night they used my mom's laugh with my dad's words and my best friend's accent. But I don't answer, I won't answer because now I know what the dairy aisle really is. It's a menu, and we're all just ingredients waiting to be added to the recipe. So here's a new rule I've added to my personal list. If you're working the night shift at Green's Corner Market, bring headphones, but really good ones. Make sure you keep an eye on them too. And if they stop working at 3 a.m., run. And just don't run toward the dairy aisle. Trust me on this. The voices are always hungry, and they've been practicing my name. Now you think after discovering the soul-stealing dairy aisle and the basement full of bound human memories, nothing at Green's Corner Market could surprise me anymore. But then I met Steve. You see, well, Steve is a mouse, at least that's what I'm calling him, though I'm pretty sure mice aren't supposed to have that many eyes, or scream in frequencies that make fluorescent lights explode. I first noticed him in aisle 5. You know, the one with all the expired candy and that weird stain on the floor that moves when you're not looking at it. He was just sitting there, perched on top of a box of Milk Duds that had probably been there since the Carter administration, staring at me with his numerous eyes. "Oh, whoa, hey, little guy," I said, because apparently 2 months of working night shift hadn't taught me anything about talking to strange creatures. Steve opened his mouth. Well, mouths. All 3 of them. And he screamed. Have you ever heard 1,000 damned souls cry out in perfect harmony while simultaneously experiencing every embarrassing moment of your life? No? Well, imagine that, but worse. The lights above us shattered, raining glass like razor-sharp confetti. Every electronic device in a 20-foot radius died instantly. My phone's screen now only displays the text, "It comes," in Comic Sans, which is honestly the most horrifying part of all of this. But here's the weird thing. Steve's screech didn't attract the thing in the dairy aisle. It didn't wake whatever's bound in the basement. Instead, all the cans in aisle 3 started rolling away from him like they were afraid. And that's when I noticed something about Steve that I probably should have seen earlier. He was casting 3 shadows. One pointed toward the dairy aisle, one toward the basement door, and one up. I checked the employee records again, from a safe distance wearing oven mitts because those books are getting a lot warmer. And it turns out Steve's been here longer than anyone, even longer than the store itself. April 14th, 1942. That's 1 day before they found the thing in the foundation. Encountered unusual rodent during surveying. Multiple eyes, unnatural shadows. When it screams, the ground refuses to be dug. Theodore Green insists we continue construction, claims the mouse is just a mouse. But the mouse disagrees. The next entry was about finding the thing in the basement, the thing they had to contain, the thing that steals voices and wears faces. But now I'm thinking they got it wrong. They weren't containing something they found. They were containing something that was already here. Now Steve's been watching me read and write notes. All his eyes are focused on my notebook. One of his mouths is smiling. The other 2 are whispering in languages that make my teeth vibrate. I finally understand why Green's Market needs all these rules. Why the dairy aisle steals voices. Why the basement binds souls. They're not containment measures. They're distraction. Something had to be blamed for all the weird stuff that happens here. Something had to be the monster under the bed, the horror in the basement, and the terror in the dairy aisle. Because if people focused on those things, then they wouldn't notice Steve. They wouldn't notice how the store's shadows never quite match the light sources, how the geometry of the aisles shift ever so slightly when Steve moves, how every single contained entity in this place seems terrified of one small, many-eyed mouse. Now I'm writing this from my usual spot from behind the counter. Steve is still watching, still smiling. The dairy aisle voices have gone quiet. Even the basement books have stopped whispering. And remember how I said the store was built as a prison? I was wrong. It's not a prison. It's a throne room. And Steve? Well, Steve isn't just the mouse with too many eyes and physics-defying screams. Steve is what Theodore Green really found that day in 1842. Or rather, what found Theodore Green. The rules don't contain anything. They appease him. They keep him entertained, give him a steady supply of voices and souls to play with. And so, I've added one final rule to my list. Don't ever offer Steve cheese. Trust me on this one. The last guy who did that, in fact, I mentioned him in the beginning of the story. His voice is now in the dairy aisle. His soul is bound in the basement. And his face, well, let's just say one of Steve's mouths needed a new smile. I still work the night shift at Green's Corner Market, not because I want to, but because Steve likes me. Says I tell good stories. Says I've figured out more than most. Says I'll make a fine addition to his collection. After all, every king needs a court jester. And Steve? Well, Steve is very much a king. So, all hail Steve, the many-eyed Lord of Green's Corner Market, sovereign of Aisle 5, keeper of shadows, and destroyer of many dairy products. May his screams be merciful, and his hunger be satiated. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go draw that triangle on the loading dock door. And not because it contains anything, but because Steve enjoys watching us perform our little rituals. It's good to keep the king entertained. Found scrawled in the margins of the night shift rules in handwriting that appears to be written in ever-shifting colors. Final rule, Steve's rule. If you hear squeaking in aisle 5, don't look up, don't look down. In fact, don't look at all. Just remember, you were never the one doing the watching. You were always the one being watched. All hail Steve.